In this video, we are going to add some CSS to the form that we created in our last class. So let's get started. The first thing we're going to do is to style the form. So the form tag to begin with, we can style the width, so we can set the width of how big this form is going to be. We can set something like a background color. We can add padding, which is the space inside of the form. And also the margin, which is the space outside of the form, and we can also give it a nice round corner to the form, so that would be the border radius. So let's just get out of this PowerPoint for a bit, and we're going into Atom, and let's go to the form.html that we were working on, and here's our form, right, from last class. So this is our form here, the form element that contains everything. So I'm going to add some style to this so that it can have a background and nice rounded edges to it. So let's go to our CSS here, and I've entered a section here, and it doesn't have to be at the top. In fact, it's probably somewhere in the middle or at the bottom that you want to add this section. But for the purposes of this video, I have it at the top so it's easy for you to see. So I'm going to start with the form declaration, and I'm going to give it a width. Let's say I'm going to make it flexible, I guess 80% of the page, and I'm going to have a margin so it doesn't touch the sides of the web page, so the margin will be 20 pixels all around, and then I'll have a padding. Okay, it's also going to be 20 pixels, so there's a nice space inside of the form. And then I'm going to have a background color, so not quite a white, but maybe an ivory color, a bit of an off-white. Next, I'm going to have a border radius, and the border radius would be, let's say, 4 pixels. Give it a nice round corner for instead of a sharp edge, and I'm also going to have a border. So the border will be 1 pixel. It'll be solid and black. So you have to have all these values, otherwise it won't work for the border. So I'm just gonna save all, and I'll go to form. There it is, there's form right there. I'm gonna go to packages and view in browser, and that's what it looks like. Okay, so it's a nice start. See, I have some space, but each input is kind of too close to each other. I want to give it some space, right? So that would be the margin for each of these inputs. So let's go and style the input. Okay, going back to the PowerPoint, styling input fields. So use the width property to determine the width of how big you want the input field to be, and the declaration will look like this input, and you can set the width. You can also set things like the padding. So use the padding property to text to add the space inside each of the input fields. When you have many inputs one after another, you want to also add some space around it, around the outside, which would be the margin. Okay. All right, so before we look at input type text, let's end that show first, and let's look at input first. So let's go over here, going to style. So you can style input, that would be the selector that you would write the CSS style sheet for. And if I say input, give it some space, margin, I don't want them to all touch. So margin 20 pixels, okay, and then the padding would be the space inside of each input. Padding would be 5 pixels, not quite as big. So let's go file, save all, and then I'm going to go and refresh it. There we go. Now I have, they're not quite touching to each other, and they also have the space inside of it, each input field, right? So that's great. I can also set the width, but notice what happens when I set the width. Let's say I want the width to be 500 pixels, okay? So if I set the width to be 500 pixels, and I go File, Save All, and go, oh, everything is 500 pixels, even these radio buttons. So I don't quite want that. I don't need the Submit button to be 500 fields. So let's go take a look at how I can just only style some of the input fields and not all of them. So if I go Input, and then in these square brackets, type equals text. So if you want to style a specific input type, you can use the attribute selector. This is called an attribute selector. So inside of these square brackets, you can set the attribute selector, okay? So for example, input type text will only select the text fields and apply the style to it. If you want it only for the password, so maybe you want it to be hidden characters, then you can do type equals password, or number only for the numbers. Maybe you want it to appear blue, then you can go type equals number and only selects the number fields. Okay, so let's go see how we can only affect the input type text. Okay, so you can change the border property or the border radius, things like that, but what I'm interested right now in is just setting the width. So let's say I want the width to be 500 pixels, but only for input for the text field. So I would go input, square bracket, okay, and then type equals text, okay, and let's set the width to be 500 pixels, okay, and this should only be for this should then only be for the input fields. There you go. So I'm just gonna go here and save all and then refresh. And there you have it, just for the input field. Okay, so next let's go take a look at the border. So if you want a bottom border for it, you can use the border bottom property. You can have a border of none. Okay, and then border bottom and set the property there. So let's go try that for the text. So border is going to be none, and then border just the bottom. So you just want an underline equals 1 pixel solid black. There you go. So I'm gonna save this file. Save all, and let's go refresh. Now you have it, just the bottom border. Okay, so let's go take a look at the next thing we have in here is and this one is fun, it's the focused input. So by default, some browsers add a blue outline around the input when it gets focused or clicked on. You can remove this behavior by adding outline none to the input. But this focus selector is very important. You can do something with the input field when it gets into focus. So it would look like this. You're adding it on even longer. So it will have the colon and then focus, and you can tell it to be whatever style you want it to be. Okay, so for example, maybe when I click on it, I want the, so maybe I want the background to be a different color. Okay, so let's go try and do that in the CSS. Okay, so I'm going to go over here. All right, so the selector is going to get even longer. So it would be input, and to select only the type text, it would be in the square brackets, type equals text. Okay, and now I want to select the state of just focus. Okay. Right, so that is my selector, quite long. And now I want the background color to be, let's say, what's a nice background color that's obvious? Let's just try, how about Misty Rose? Misty Rose is a nice one. Misty Rose, there we go. It's a nice pink. Okay, full file, save all. So when I click in it, not hover, but when I click in it, when I focus in it, then the background color is going to be Misty Rose. Okay, so let's go check that out. Okay, so I refresh, and then when I click in it, the background color becomes Misty Rose. Okay, so that's quite fun, right? And you can do this for any property inside the focus, right? You could change the border outline color, you can change the font weight, so anything like that. All right, so that's it for this video. In the next video, we'll continue on with more CSS styles to play around in the form.